I don't really know what I'm going to title this video, but it's basically about books that I could never get rid of, books that I could never sell, books that I wouldn't want to sell, basically just books that I have to keep in my possession for one reason or another. Some of them have particular memories associated with them, or I have a really good connection with the book and I could just never part with it. Recently I've been trying to get rid of some books and it's actually been more challenging than I expected. I thought, you know what, I can turn these books into money and sell them, and you know, I can earn a lot of money because I have a lot of books on my bookshelf. And then I realised there are quite a few books that I just don't want to sell. I've been selling them on eBay. If you are interested, my eBay account is Jacor9, which I'll link down below in the description if you want to buy some books that I have on my shelves. Not all of them are listed, but some of them are. I know this is shameless self-promotion, but all the big YouTubers do that, so I'm just copying them. The first book that I would not be able to get rid of is actually an entire series of books. It is the Warrior Cat series by Erin Hunter. This is one of the more recent books from one of the more recent series, but I think I have over 35 books on my shelf, and definitely the main series books, the series are in series of 6, I would not be able to get rid of them because I have so many fond memories associated with these books, and to be honest, they really shaped the kind of reader that I am today. I think it was when I was about 10 that I discovered the Warriors series, and since then I've been a very avid reader. These books made me obsessed with reading. I just wanted to read all the time, and initially I was just reading the Warriors books because there's so many of them and I had so many to read. What I loved about these books was initially the characters. The characters are very memorable, very likeable, unpredictable. The plot as well is always fast-paced, there's so much going on, so much adventure. The setting is presented in a very visual way, so it's really easy to imagine things in your head. I can remember that as a 10-year-old I found the books very accessible. They were really everything I wanted from reading because I hadn't really been a massive reader before then. I remember when I was about 13 or 14 I was waiting for the new books to be released because I'd already caught up with the ones that had already been released in the first 3 series, and then this is the 4th series which was being released at the time. And I remember I used to go on Amazon, get my parents to pre-order the books so that they would arrive on the release date. As soon as they would arrive, I would be home from school, I would be reading them. I remember quite vividly, it used to always seem to be on a Friday for some reason. The post always seemed to come on a Friday with new releases of the Warriors books. And because I didn't have school the next day, I had enough time to stay up a bit later at night and read the books all in one sitting. It was really amazing, and because I have so many memories of these books and they are really my childhood favourites, I just don't think I could part with them. Like, even if I could earn money from them, I just don't think I'd want to, you know, give them away or sell them because, you know, I have a connection with them. I think that they are special. I would actually like to look back on them in the future, even if I don't necessarily read them again in the future because they're children's books. I would still want to keep them just for the memories. The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and in particular this particular book, this particular edition. This is the first ever Hunger Games book that I bought. I remember buying it from Waterstones in November 2011. I have very vivid memories of all of these books that I'm mentioning today. I remember it was November 2011, and initially I think I read about 50 pages of it and then put it down. For some reason I just left it for about 2 weeks after that. And then it was getting into December and it was a really cold night and I was sat in my house freezing to death, and I thought, I want to read a book. Because I'd already started the Hunger Games, I thought I would restart it again from the very beginning, and I read it within the space of about 3 days. I read it all that evening when it was really cold, sat by the radiator, and then I read it the next day and the next day until I finished. It really got me interested in the dystopian and science fiction genre. It made me want to read so many other books like that, and to be honest, none of them have ever been as good as The Hunger Games. I'm talking about Divergent, The Maze Runner, all of those books. None of them, for me, are as good as The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is the original dystopia that I fell in love with. I don't think I could find anything that's as good as it. Around the time when I'd finished reading this book in December 2011, the film was about to come out in March 2012. So I was completely obsessed with The Hunger Games at that point. I was talking to people on Twitter all the time about The Hunger Games. I made so many friends on there, and on YouTube as well, actually. When I was making BookTube videos around that time, I was constantly on about the Hunger Games. I remember rereading the book before the film came out, and by the time the film came out I was almost like an expert in the Hunger Games. Then I read Catching Fire and Mockingjay, and I was constantly rereading them when the films were coming out, and I just have so many amazing memories of the Hunger Games. Like, it's the first young adult trilogy that I really fell in love with, and particularly this particular book. It's a little bit battered compared to some of the other editions I have, because I've bought so many different Hunger Games editions. But this is the first one I read, this is the first edition I bought, and I just could not ever get rid of it. The next book that I could never get rid of is The Shadow of the Wind by Ruiz Zafón. This is a book that I read in June 2013. I am very good at remembering certain things like dates. Might not be good at remembering everything, like studying and study facts and things, but I'm good at remembering dates of when I read books. It was a really hot summer's day when I started this book. I was reading outside in the garden. I think I read for the entire day, and I didn't finish it in a day because it's a relatively big book, but I think over the space of a week I completely devoured the book and fell in love with it. Initially I picked up this book because I heard it was a book about books, so I thought, you know what, I love books about books, I love reading about books and booksellers and bookstores, so it would be perfect, and in fact it is a perfect book. But what also really amazed me about the book was the cultural and historical aspects. It's about Spain. It deals with 20th century Spanish history, touching on things like the Spanish Civil War and dictatorship. It was just a really gripping read. It's very violent, it's very gothic and dark at times, but I remember just really loving it, and it really inspired me to read more cultural and historical books. I also remember when I was applying to university to study Spanish that this made up a massive part of my personal statement. It kind of got me into university in some ways because I was so passionate about the book and I wanted to talk about it in the personal statement. Clearly the admissions officers at the university were impressed by my passion for The Shadow of the Wind, and I'm so passionate about the book that I just don't think I could ever get rid of it. The next one is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, and this is a book that I actually had to study in school in my GCSEs, so I was probably about 15 at the time, and I know a lot of people read books for school and they do not have fond memories of them. A lot of people read books for school and never want to see them again, and that's kind of understandable because, you know, sometimes they're not taught in the most exciting ways. But I personally really enjoyed this book and got a lot out of it. I remember studying it for the exam and being really interested in the book, and actually got an A star in the English Literature GCSE exam. I think that was because I really liked this book. I could really get into it. I could really understand the characters and their motives, their intentions, and I just loved analysing them. In fact, in this book there are quite a few annotations as well. I look back on these annotations now and they're so simplistic. I could come up with better analysis if I studied this book again right now. But obviously I've developed as a reader, I've developed as a student as well. Even though my annotations are quite simplistic, I like looking back on them. It shows me how much I've grown as a student, how much I've learnt over the past few years studying. So, you know, this is a book that I just think has so many memories because I studied it at school. Another book that I studied at school and could never get rid of is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and actually Of Mice and Men was for GCSEs, this one was for A-levels. It was in year 13 and we had to do a comparative coursework essay, so basically as part of this it was independent reading, so I got to pick the book that I wanted to study from a list of books that the teacher had recommended. I'd always heard about Jane Eyre and the Bronte sisters, particularly being from Yorkshire, you hear about them all the time, and I thought Jane Eyre would be a great way to get into their books, and also it would be a great one to study. So I picked this up based on the teacher's recommendation and actually fell in love with it. It really showed me that classics could be unpredictable and fun and enjoyable. They were not just old and in the past. We can read classics and learn so much from them. We can learn about ourselves even in the present day, and I just completely fell in love with it. I read it really quickly and I've reread it a few times since. When I did the comparative essay I compared it with Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, which is a prequel to Jane Eyre, and that's sort of set in the Caribbean, so I loved learning about that one as well. but Jane Eyre was the initial one that I chose to read. I've annotated it a lot like my other school text. There are some sticky notes in here where I was making notes and highlighting key passages. Some of the descriptions are just so memorable. They're like iconic descriptions of classic literature. The final book that I could never get rid of is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is also one that I studied for A-levels. I actually had to study this twice because the first time I took the exam in year 12 and I got a B. And, you know, I'm a perfectionist. I wanted an A. So I decided to retake the exam and I did get an A the second time. In fact, I got full marks in this exam. I think that was because I was genuinely interested in the book and passionate about it. I really got into it. I knew passages from this book off by heart. Although initially when I read it the first time, I didn't love it so much. And I think the reason why I have a kind of connection with this book is because I seem to have grown with it. When I first read it, it was probably like 2013, and I just didn't really get much out of it. I thought it was an interesting book, but I didn't really learn much from it. The more the teachers talked about it and talked about the context and the themes, the more I seemed to connect with it and just find it a really interesting book. There were so many different literary theories that I could bring into this when I was talking about it in the exam. It was a really complex book, in fact a lot more complex than I initially thought. It's not one of my favourite ever books, to be honest, but it's one that I have great memories of because I studied the book a lot. I studied really hard with this book. I wanted to do well in the exam, and it just kind of has a sense of ambition around it, and I really have great memories of it. So those are some of the books that I would never be able to get rid of. I would never be able to sell them. I'm selling quite a lot of books, but these are ones that I could just never part with. Let me know down below in the comments which books you would never want to get rid of. Even if you could sell them and earn money, you would still want to keep them. Or maybe even make a video. That would be amazing, to see other people's videos talking about the books in a bit more detail than you can in the comments section. But anyway, whatever you decide to do, please let me know because I love interacting with all my subscribers, and I will see you all again in my next video.